Third part, sorry, sorry. Third part of our discussions, consolidated discussions. First part was on philosophy. Second part on metapsychology. Third part on concepts. Some concepts that Patanjali uses, I have put up here. And then the eightfold path of Patanjali. Samapatti is a concept used by Patanjali to denote a variety of states. Some states for which he uses the word samadhi, some states for which he uses the word samapatti. Approximate translation would be, he is referring to states which are like quarter samadhi, half samadhi, three-quarter samadhi, intermediate goals on the way towards the final goal of samadhi. One way to understand samapatti is to delineate the intermediate goals. It's a very important concept used in Patanjali. Many spiritual schools don't use any intermediate goals. Either you are there or you are not. Patanjali is more fine, more graduated, more calibrated. So he talks about samapatti, and one of the states of samapatti he talks about is the state of stillness or the state of observation, even while the intellectual and cognitive, intellectual and affective activities are going on in the mind. So that state of observation of intellectual and affective activities is termed as samapatti. The state of stillness is also termed as samapatti. The state of stoicness, where one is equanimous to whatever is going on in the mind. Something is going on. It is not a state of samadhi, but one is equanimous to what is going on. That is also termed as a state of samapatti. So samapatti refers to a state which is like quarter samadhi, half samadhi, and in psychic terms, these are states of stoicness, these are states of stillness, these are states of observation, deep observation. Then he comes to the concept of savichar and nirvichar samadhi. Savichar is with thoughts. Some people think this is a oxymoron. There cannot be a samadhi when thoughts are on. But Patanjali goes in a calibrated way, uses the word samadhi in a very liberal sense, uses it as a category word instead of a word that has one specific meaning. He uses it as a category word. So that state of samadhi when there is heightened awareness, a sense of bliss, and one or two thoughts going on, and one is very clearly detached from those thoughts, not overwhelmed by those thoughts, but the thoughts are going on. That is a state of savichar samadhi. An alternative explanation is, by thinking about certain things, one enters into the state of samadhi. One has to go through a psychological thought process and then enter the state of samadhi. Some people also talk of that as Savichar Samadhi. Nirvichar Samadhi is the real Samadhi where there are no thoughts at all, a state of no thought. A state of no thought, high awareness and bliss. Usually these combination goes together. Three characteristics: no thought, high awareness, bliss. And no thought means no cognitive content, no affective content. So we have no thought, high awareness, bliss. And when we have no thought, naturally there are no objects. So this is a thought-free, affect-free, object-free state where there is high awareness and bliss. This is the state of Nirvichar Samadhi, or really this is called as Samadhi. There is also a comparable description of Samadhi. Yoganand Paramahansa also discusses it. Others also do. Savikalpa and Nirvikalpa. Savikalpa is when you have to prepare yourself to go into a state of Samadhi. You are there for some time and then you come back to the natural state. You cannot make it a permanent state. And when you are doing ordinary work, you are like any other ordinary person. Nirvikalpa is the Samadhi is continuous even when you are doing anything. So there is Samadhi is continuous in the meaning that a part of the Samadhi experience continues even while the rest of you is involved in ordinary activities. That is Nirvikalpa. Without any Vikalpa, it stays as it is. At least a part of it stays as it is. Then Patanjali uses another term of the goal state, rather an intermediate state. He says Dharma Megha Samadhi. So what he talks about is, even after having these high rare experiences, if one does not convert it into an attainment and be proud of it or get entangled by it. So even after having these rare experiences, if one does not get entangled by it or get a kick of power out of it or any other kick out of that attainment, then one can again go into the Samadhi, and that would be a Dharma Megha Samadhi. And then he talks about the final Samadhi in a different way, where he talks about oceanic oneness with existence. So Patanjali talks about many different types of Samadhi. At some places he talks about Kaivalya, pure consciousness and nothing else, not even awareness and bliss. At times it can be only awareness but no bliss. At times it can be bliss also, awareness also. So he talks of Kaivalya. Then he talks of various different types of Samadhi. And we made a list of it. We said oneness with existence is one form of Samadhi. Dissolution into nothingness, Nirvana, is another form of Samadhi. Kaivalya, pure consciousness, is the third form of Samadhi. Pure consciousness, awareness and bliss is the fourth form of Samadhi. State of no thought is the fifth form of Samadhi. Stillness, where from the state of no thought you remove bliss and you get into stillness, is sixth form of Samadhi. Getting lost into the inertia can be the seventh form of Samadhi, less spoken about, less explored, possibly dangerous also. So 7 forms of Samadhi, and different people talk about it in different ways. We should be using very clear words for each of these 7 states and not confuse them by using one word. I don't know why we are so hesitant to coin new words when they are necessary. Patanjali then brings to the center his eightfold path, which we have discussed. Yama is, the step 1 is Yama, 2 is Niyama, 3 is Asana, 4th Pranayam, 5th Pratyahar, 6th Dharana, 7th Dhyan, 8th Samadhi. This is completely out of psychoanalysis, a completely different way of moving on the path of self-healing and self-development, reaching the state of Samadhi, which also is beyond the scope of psychoanalysis. Using tools like Dharana, concentration and Dhyan, oneness, which again are out of scope of psychoanalysis. Pratyahar also is out of scope of psychoanalysis. So let us quickly go through it. Yama is internal discipline. What it is we have seen before. Niyama is behavioral discipline. Asana is physical yoga postures. Pranayam is breath work of yoga. And all of this prepare one. As one moves from here downwards, we become more healthy, more integrated, more healthy, more happy, more peaceful, less traumatized by complexes. Not that everyone will move down this way and not get stuck anywhere, not that it will work on everyone, but it is one of the possible ways for healing oneself and developing oneself. Pranayam and asana are something we can see. Niyama is behavioral therapy. One gives to oneself. Asana is important. It reminds us of Wilhelm Reich and character armor and body work to release complexes. Once tried in psychoanalysis, now out of fashion. Pranayam, one is reminded of holotropic breathing. I forget the name of the inventor. Stanislav Grof. He did pioneering work using breath to bring down deep-seated trauma. And his experience was even the archetypal images come about and deep-seated traumas also come about by certain breath work. Patanjali also prescribes breath work, but he prescribed breath work more on the yogic lines. But the point is that working with breath can be one way to work with trauma. Working with physical postures can be one way to work with trauma. So we don't have to go by the classical psychoanalytic way of reflecting, not acting. That is not absolute truth. There is some truth to it, but it's not an absolute truth. No need to create a superstition out of it. So you can work with the body. You can work on the trauma by working on the body. You can work on the trauma by working on the breath. And pratyahar, withdrawal from objects and unnecessary concerns. This brings about a technique in modern times put forward by Sri Aurobindo. He calls it step back and reject. Sri Aurobindo's three-step model is aspiration, rejection, and surrender. Second step is rejection. And rejection, he says, step back and reject. It is neither suppression nor repression. It is stepping back and rejecting it with conviction and full awareness, neither suppression nor repression. So this is rejection, which is not suppression, not repression, and salutary and healing. Dharana, concentration also can be used on different forms, on different mantras for self-purification. Dhyana, getting lost, becoming one with an idol or an object, also can be used for what Kohut says, transmuting internalization, deep-seated transmutations. So, and then entering the state of samadhi, which is outside the scope of psychoanalysis. But all these tools can be used in psychoanalysis. They were never used because they were against the hedonistic principle, and psychoanalysis grew up in 5 days a week situation, so there was no question of self-work. Today, when we have 1 to 2 sessions per week in most countries, there is scope for introducing self-work in psychoanalysis and bringing these holistic tools into play in psychoanalysis. We can have empirical research and find out how it operates in different cultures, on different people, on different pathology, and then integrate it to psychoanalysis. Patanjali largely bases his work like psychoanalysis on individual action. It does not bring in the social context or the historical context. And that is very much like psychoanalysis. Patanjali talks of purification, psychoanalysis talks of catharsis. Patanjali goes into cost-benefit analysis, same with psychoanalysis. We also use the idea of cost-benefit analysis to turn the pathology ego-dystonic. Patanjali talks about the transpersonal nature of desire, whereas in psychoanalysis we talk about personal desire only. The transpersonal nature of desire and the transpersonal nature of mind brings in metaphysics and philosophy into Patanjali. Psychoanalysis keeps away from it. Very important concept of Patanjali talks about is transformational containment offered by the one truly established. In many sutras, he says, enmity can be given up in the presence of somebody who has really conquered violence, enmity, and is truly established in peace. So what happens in his presence? The unconscious dynamic containment happens, a transformational containment happens. The quality of containment provided by someone depends on his own state of development. The more developed a person is, the more transformational containment he can provide, and more transformation will happen then in his presence. And this has strong implications for psychoanalysis, particularly Bayesian psychoanalysis, where containment is a very strong element. Dynamic containment, not only a passive containment where somebody throws into you, but you process it and give it back to the person. So very positive and dynamic containment. And that alchemical process that happens unconsciously is based upon how truly established you are within yourself, how sorted out, how developed you are. And Patanjali provides there a very clear idea of what kind of transformational containment can be provided by somebody who is established. And different people are established differently in their depths, and therefore can provide different types of dynamic and transformational containment. Very important for psychoanalysis to integrate. Patanjali talks about holistic healing. He does not limit himself to one idea or one method. He talks about the psyche and substance connection. This is a title by Edmund Whitmont, and title of his book Psyche and Substance. But Patanjali takes up this idea and he says even concoctions, psychedelic substances, herbal substances can help you overcome the psychic problems. So this is a vast area of healing by herbal substances, including psychedelics. Still on the fringes of psychoanalysis, after a long period of ban, now the ban is lifted. Psychedelic research has started. I think in next 10 years, we should have the psyche and substance coming into psychoanalysis also, especially for reducing repression and defenses. I'm told in ISTDP also they are using to overcome repression and defenses. The use of mantra, which we have just simply not explored in psychoanalysis, the whole field of sound, mantra, and the whole field of visualization. And both of them are very powerful components of idol therapy. Mantra can be used in isolation by itself. Visualization can be used in isolation, both of them together, or both of them along with many other things in case of idol therapy. And these are very powerful healing paths yet to be explored fully by psychotherapy. Psychoanalysis is even further off. Patanjali talks about behavioral development in Yama and Niyama. Very importantly, he talks about, without using the words, he harnesses the superego strength. In his first 2 or 3 steps, he harnesses the superego strength. In psychoanalysis, we talk only about superego pathology. We don't talk about superego strength. We don't talk about superego happiness. We only see superego as a killer of the happiness of id. But actually, there is a superego strength and superego happiness, ecstatic happiness. which we have not uh, cultivated, we have not harnessed. So we need to harness in psychoanalysis superego strength and superego happiness. Very important concept Patanjali uses is the concept of activation and deactivation. That when you go into the state of samadhi, the ordinary parts are not essentially transformed completely. They are deactivated. And when you come back from the state of samadhi, part of the ordinary part of your personality is transformed, but a larger part remains, and it again becomes active. For very few people, a single experience of samadhi purifies the whole personality. Most people, the purification work goes on, and therefore, just as non-integration, the caesure, the gulf, the fragmentation of personality, the disassociation is a very fundamental fact of the human mind, and therefore the core challenge is integration. Similarly, activation and deactivation also are equally fundamental entities. And the key challenge is to have mastery over activation and deactivation consciously. Activation and deactivation are as fundamental as integration and disassociation. Cultivation of good qualities, something that we don't get into psychoanalysis, but directly, but Patanjali uses it very obviously. One more behavioral practice. Power of visualization, concentration, mantra. Purusha and the mind, the infinite regress. One concept that Patanjali uses is, he says, the mind cannot know itself completely. It is the Purusha which sees the mind and knows the mind. Because if the mind becomes a mirror, then there is a mirror looking at the mirror, and then again a mirror, and infinite regress. And therefore, it is the Purusha that analyzes the mind and transforms the mind. It is not one part of the mind looking at another part of the mind, rather the Purusha using one part of the thinking capability of the mind to reflect upon the rest of the mind. Very different from psychoanalysis, where the observing ego and the participating ego, they are one, and the observing ego separates from the participating ego. Here we are saying it is not only the observing ego, but an observer which can even observe the observing ego, the Purusha. Observing ego, and the final observer is the Purusha. The light of self uncovered, a completely mystical concept, not touched in psychoanalysis. Patanjali says, once the obstacles of personality are overcome, the light of self is uncovered and the light comes out. Patanjali talks about the true self, and he says, aligning oneself with the true self, going back to the true self, is one way to enter into samadhi. And this is not the true self of Vinayakot. He is talking about the psychic being, the soul, the evolutionary soul. The concept of Purusha we have dealt with before, and the concept of oceanic oneness. Now, this oceanic oneness is a spiritual state. It is not a pre-ego state, it is the post-ego state. It is not a pre-object state, it is a post-object state. And this is not the primordial gestalt of primary narcissism. There also there is a feeling of oceanic oneness, but that oceanic oneness is not oneness with existence. It is the existence of a primordial gestalt, of oceanic gestalt. So the oceanic gestalt of primary narcissism and the oceanic oneness of the spiritual attainment are completely different states, and the experience is completely different. So many times Freudians cannot understand oceanic oneness of the spiritual type, and they think of this as the oceanic gestalt, which is a pre-object state of primary narcissism. The pre-object state is the oceanic gestalt is a pre-object state, a temporary state, infantile state. whereas oceanic oneness is a goal of human development, the goal of human life. Questions, if any, write to hvindia@gmail.com. Thank you.